This is a continuation of Antony and Cleopatra. And I know I'm using the word, I use these superlatives, great, the best, and all that. I know I said that King Lear is the most powerful, the most moving of the tragedies. And I'd make that distinction, though Antony and Cleopatra is almost as moving under totally different circumstances. It's the greatest of Shakespeare's plays, I think. The others can't match it, I think, for abundance of poetry, for linguistic subtlety and lyricism and joy, I think. Because, as I said, although it's a tragedy, the characters die, the play represents the triumph of the heart. The triumph of the human heart. Okay, I want to tell you about a couple of scenes that I skipped earlier that are dear to me. Earlier in the play. In Act 2, when Antony and Octavius have basically made the deal that Antony will marry Octavia, to celebrate, we also meet Pompey. Now this is the son of Pompey the Great. Pompey the Great had been defeated and basically killed by Julius Caesar in Julius Caesar's quest for absolute power. And Pompey the Great was a great man and a great general. Pompey, the son, felt that his father had been treated unjustly. Antony himself had confiscated one of Pompey's houses, and imagine what a Pompey house must have been. Huge, luxurious, wonderful. So Pompey had gathered a navy about him, centered in Sicily, and his navy was very powerful. More powerful than Octavius's navy. But if Antony's joined with it, then the situation would change. And basically Pompey and his men, and a lot of them, thousands, were pirating, raiding towns and cities in southern Italy, and causing Octavius a lot of problems. This was one of the main reasons why Octavius needed Antony's help, and wasn't getting it. Now Antony comes to town, and they meet Pompey. Pompey is somewhat awed, I think, by Antony, and that again is another of those measures of how great a person is. The reaction of somebody as imposing, as impressive as Pompey is interesting. And Pompey basically yields and says, keep my father's house, typical of the generosity of these people who have so much, though. And they make an agreement. There will be no more piracy. I think basically they gave him Sicily. But in a sense they gave him what he had already. Now, an assistant to Pompey is Menas, M-E-N-A-S. And Menas corresponds to Enobarbus. As I told you, Enobarbus is Antony's right-hand man, a general himself, and a wit, and one of the great secondary characters, far greater than Horatio, for example, or far more interesting. Horatio of Hamlet. Okay, so these great men, the triumvirate, that is Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus, of the second triumvirate. Lepidus, a very rich man, and admitted into the triumvirate because of his money and power, along with Pompey and Menas, and along with Enobarbus. Enobarbus is there. A few other people are there, and servants all gather on a ship in a harbor to drink and socialize. Okay, in the middle of this socializing, Manus, who has talked with Barbas, he's kind of a charming guy, he's an interesting guy, and a tough guy. Manus slips beside Pompey and says, "Wilt thou be Lord of the world?" That is, would you like to be Lord of the world? And Pompey, who has been drinking and laughing, drinking and laughing, they all make fools of themselves. They all make fools of themselves, and that's one of the points of the scene, I would say. Pompey says to him, "Are you crazy? You've been drinking too much." Manus says, "No, I haven't had a drop to drink." I'll say it again. "Wilt thou be Lord of the world?" Do you want to be Lord of the world? Manus doesn't quite get it. What do you mean? Well, what Manus means is all he has to do is cut the... He doesn't even have to do that, really, but let's say pull up the anchor, or, even better, just slip behind Antony, Lepidus, and Octavius and cut their throats. That's all. Cut their throats. And Pompey is the Lord of the world. Right there. This thought is too big for Pompey. It's just too big. And I think even if he had not been drinking, it would have been too big. He's a little too awed, A-W-E-D. He's a little too awed by the company, especially by Antony. The thought is too big for him. And so he responds in an interesting way. He said, "If you had just done it and not told me, I would have crowned you. I would have praised you. But now my honor is at stake." Well, this is a striking instance of this word honor. And C.S. Lewis once said criticized Shakespeare for this honor, this use of honor. Honor is one of these words that gets thrown around. It was huge in the Renaissance. I'm sure it's been huge in Korea and Oriental Asian countries too. But according to C.S. Lewis, who is a devout Christian thinker, the word honor is silly nonsense. And of course it is directly contradictory to everything Christian. Contradictory to Christian humility, forgiveness. After all, this use of honor means if you call me a bad name, out come our swords and we duel to the death. Or if you say something that offends me somehow, out come the swords, my honor is stained, we duel to the death. Well, C.S. Lewis's point is that this was nonsense. This is simply the aristocracy giving itself the right to play its silly games and try to call it Christian, but it's not Christian in any sense. The word honor is contradictory to Christianity. C.S. Lewis's point. But here, it seems to me, in this scene with Manus, Shakespeare shows that he understands quite well what nonsense this word is, that this word is simply a word used by people for their convenience. Because when Pompey says, "My honor would be stained," what? He's simply using this word to cover up his cowardice, his timidity. He's using it as a screen. And I think that when Shakespeare says this, he reveals, I wonder if, I'll go this far, I think whenever the word honor is used, it's a screen. It's a screen for other things. And that's what Shakespeare is saying, certainly in this scene. And I suspect that's what Shakespeare thought, at least by the time he wrote Antony and Cleopatra, which he wrote at the very height of his powers. His powers would wane a little bit thereafter in Coriolanus, which is wonderful, and then The Tempest, which is wonderful. But he'll never know the height of Antony and Cleopatra again. Okay, very interesting scene. So, another scene I'm fond of, a little scene, and there are all these little scenes in the play, as I've told you. The scene shifts to Iran, Persia. And there a general Ventidius, whom we'll meet again in Act 4. Ventidius has just won a great victory over the Parthians. The Parthians, Persians basically, were a big problem to the Romans. They never really got control of them. And so the scene is in Ventidius's tent, and Ventidius is the conquering general now. An assistant of his comes to Ventidius and says, "Shall we pursue them? We can kill them now. We can remove the Parthian threat right now." And Ventidius says, "No. No, don't do it. Because he who outshines the general is going to lose." That is, he doesn't dare do more than, he doesn't dare, cheap expression, he doesn't dare steal the spotlight from Antony. That's too dangerous. Antony might be jealous, might resent such vast success, because this would have been a vast victory, a victory of vast importance. It would have eliminated many future wars. But Ventidius, sharp man that he is, says, no, 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 too dangerous. For me, this might cost me my head. Very sharp. So Shakespeare had read the Roman literature, and this kind of insight is common in the Roman literature and in Plutarch too. That is, high level of sophistication. I must admit that in Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare has the best of all the stories. He's got this Roman story, well documented by brilliant people who had analyzed it, and he has the benefit of that. In the case of Hamlet, really he has a mediocre story. In the case of Othello, mediocre story. And even Macbeth, nothing much. But in this story, he has great characters ready-made. There they are. He has only to equal their greatness, and the greatness accorded to them by their authors, like Plutarch. In his case, of course, he goes far beyond what any author could have done, any author could ever have done. No author could have treated this, or could treat this with anything like what Shakespeare did. Okay, now we get to the end of Act 4. Toward the end of Act 4, Enobarbus has become more and more uncomfortable. He's certainly uncomfortable with that first battle scene where Antony fled, following the sails of Cleopatra, And as I told you yesterday, he says, "My heart and my head begin to be at war." In his heart, he wants to stay with Antony. He loves Antony. But in his head, he sees Antony making very foolish decisions. Okay. So then, after that first day, he decides, I'm leaving. So, during the night, apparently, he slips out. He's a general. He's a super general. He's not a commoner. So where he goes, people watch. But he went out alone, and he slipped over to Octavius's side. The next morning, a servant tells Antony what had happened. Enobarbus is gone. Antony's immediate reaction: send his treasures and add some more treasures to it. Now, I haven't discussed this yet, but the largesse is the word, the French word, or the magnanimity, the greatness of heart that is Antony's begins to, well, we've seen it all to play, actually. I can't say begins, but it's typical of Antony. Was he angry? No. His first thought is, my best people, I'm making my best people worse. I'm bringing out my foolery, my follies are bringing out the worst qualities in the best people close to me. That is, he chides himself, he reproaches himself, and with typical generosity, material generosity, of course, the great, we can view this two ways. Many of the great, I think, are pretty stingy, pretty frugal, are not easily led to simply gush forth abundance and give and give and give. But Antony is the opposite. Antony would give and give and give until nothing's left, and he tried to give some more. Octavius, to his credit, is a little like that, but Antony is just a heart. He's a heart, that's all. Octavius always thinks. Antony feels. He's a heart. Okay, well that's very moving. So then we get this great scene early in Act 4 that's so powerful. It's late at night. Soldiers are keeping watch out in the fields. And two soldiers are talking, and they hear strange music. Strange supernatural music. And one of the soldiers says, I'm going to tell you something else too. But one of the soldiers says, it's Hercules, the god Hercules, now leaving Antony. Antony had always claimed to have descended from Hercules. This was still common in the Greek and Roman times. That is, they would try to trace back their lineage to some god. Okay, and this can be pardoned as far as I'm concerned in Antony, such silliness. But that the common, nameless, anonymous soldier says that. In Shakespeare, that's absolute. He speaks with absolute authority. We know it's true. Now I have to tell you one other scene and then slip back to this, because earlier in that scene on the boat, on the ship, where all those great men, powerful men, are getting very drunk, we get a short little conversation among the servants, the nameless, anonymous servants, who are commenting on that all the power in the world is concentrated on that boat. Of course, Western world, but well into the East too. And the boat is rocking, so to speak, because they are all drunk and making fools of themselves. And their level of conversation is very foolish. Lepidus gets very drunk, boyishly, sloppy, vomiting drunk. Octavius can't drink much anyway, and he gets a little drunk, but he will not let himself get very drunk, and you know he won't. And Antony can drink all night and fight a war the next day. And he does that. And Antony can drink all night and fight a war the next day. The kind of man he is. Okay. Back to the scene with the soldiers in the fields. In the field there, on the plain, whatever. It's night, remember. And suddenly the soldiers hear a voice, and shh, it's Enobarbus. First, okay, I'm going to try to do this here. Enobarbus. Okay, basically Enobarbus dies of a broken heart. Right there, boom. He literally dies in a ditch of a broken heart. He's so overwhelmed at having, I guess, at having abandoned or betrayed Antony, but he's more overwhelmed by Antony's gesture, by Antony's generosity. Sorry. And it breaks his heart, and he dies right there in a ditch. Okay, moving on. What else is next here? Enobarbus. Okay. Now, there's a second battle. The second day, Antony's guys all do well. They win. They win the battle. And a wonderful scene shows when they return, Scaurus, who's a great general. Scaurus apparently fought like a devil. And Antony says, I've never seen anything like that. A man like you, I've never seen a man fight like this man fought. And he's a general. He's a general. And he asks Cleopatra, when they come back, he asks Cleopatra to take off the armor of Scaurus, a great honor. Now, I forgot to tell you, I've got to move back, because the previous day, or the previous battle, which had ended so ignominiously, so shamefully, with Antony running, and everyone was so humiliated and embarrassed, Antony comes in and he feels so humiliated. He's so angry at himself. He's so crushed and remorseful. Okay. And he's angry, and he throws things around, and Cleopatra comes to see him, but a servant says, "Not now, not now," and she goes away. This is interesting because that sets up a second scene, a few scenes later. Finally, she comes meekly to him. Acts 4 and 5 are so so wonderful. Okay, she comes meekly to him, and she says, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going to follow me. I didn't think you would follow me. I better take these off. And he says, you know my heart is attached to you. Anyway, great scene. I better do it this way. So she weeps. And his emotion is overwhelming too. And I ought to read a speech to you. Maybe I can do that. God, maybe I can do that. Fall not a tear. Fall not a tear. All her tears are worth an empire. One tear of hers is worth an empire. That's what he says. And he's right. Okay. So, these great scenes in Act 4 and Act 5, it just never stops. It never stops. And there are so many, too. Now, and I'm not at the end of Act 4 by any means. Okay. Caesar, I guess it must have been after the first bad day. Caesar sends Phidias, who is a top man. Caesar is surrounded by very sharp people, of course. I mean, he is so sharp. And these people have to be very, very sharp to be around him. Phidias is the name of one of these men. And he sends Phidias to Cleopatra to basically try to convince her to abandon Antony, because he knows that would just crush Antony. This is a sensitive mission, and Phidias has to be on his toes. He has to be sharp. So Phidias goes to Cleopatra, and she grants her hand to him, and he starts playing with the hand a little bit and kisses the hand, just as Antony walks by. And Antony glances over and sees this. Antony explodes disproportionately to the scene, because this kind of thing happens with royalty all the time. But anyway, he explodes, and he comes in and he says, basically he says, first he says terrible things to Cleopatra. Witty. I have neglected the wit of this play. There is so much wit. I mean, whenever Antony speaks, Cleopatra too, half the time is wit, and half the time is this miraculous use of language. Okay, so Antony comes in, and he says to Cleopatra, I found you a cold morsel on Caesar's, what's the, bench, I forget the word. Anyway, what he means is, when I found you were leftovers, cold leftovers, on a trencher, on Caesar's trencher. In other words, you had been used by other men in the past, among them Pompey and Caesar, recall. She had been married too, and she was a widow, of course. I found you cold leftovers on Caesar's plate. Whoa! Imagine when these two people get angry at each other. Their genius, through Shakespeare, of course, wow. They can say some very acerbic things. And then he says, servants, take him out, this saucy Jack here, take him out and whip him. And whip him until he cries. And then bring him back to me. Well, imagine the struggle and imagine everyone's amazement. But, now this was earlier scene, so sorry about the timing. But Enobarbus is watching, always cool and sharp. And as soon as Phidias, he said, who are you, Jack? And what are you doing? I serve Octavius, he says, with trying to keep his dignity. And Enobarbus says, aside, you'll be whipped. And that's exactly what happens. That's how sharp these people are. Take him out and whip him. And when he whimpers, bring him back. And then Antony, by now, has calmed down a little bit, and he knows he's been too he has overreacted, and as the heart will overreact, and he does that often enough. Cleopatra, by the way, earlier hit and scratched the messenger who told her that Antony was married, that Antony had remarried, had married Octavia. Famous, wonderful scene. Cleopatra just beat and scratched and hit the poor messenger and said, tell me it's wrong, tell me you lied. These are the excesses of heart, which are sometimes pretty painful or not very nice, at least. But the excesses in the direction of generosity are far greater. Okay, back to our scene. Phidias is brought back in, whimpering maybe. He has been beaten soundly. Go back to Octavius. Tell him your entertainment, he says. Tell him your entertainment. Tell him, I don't like his arrogance. Octavius is right. I don't like his arrogance. He seems to have forgotten who I am, or at least who I have been. Tell him he has a servant of mine, a bondsman, Hipparchus, I think. He can do the same to him if he wants, or torture him and kill him. I don't care. Go. And next time you see a lady's hand, tremble. Every time you see a lady's white hand, tremble before you reach for that and kiss that hand. Whoa. Okay. That's Phidias. At the end of Act 3, by the way. Now, in Act 4, we get the second battle, which we win. And Antony is charming in victory, and he wants to stay up and drink all night. And he wants the servants to drink too. And at a certain point, he has the servants weeping too. Excuse me? Okay. And they party all night. And the next day, Cleopatra charmingly tries to put on the armor of Antony. It's wonderful. And we meet this servant for the first time, Eros. E-R-O-S. His name, of course, means love, erotic, and more, as Shakespeare knew. And Eros has become the closest servant to Antony. And when Cleopatra can't put the armor on correctly, Eros does. And it's all very nice. And they're speaking very calmly, just like lovers in a calm. Then comes the battle, and the battle is hopelessly lost. Caesar, Octavius, wins the battle. By the way, Octavius was Julius Caesar's grand-nephew. I'm sure I was a little unclear on that before. Grand-nephew. I'll look that one up, maybe. Okay. So this time things are terrible. And Antony is very upset and angry, so angry and upset that he once again says some bad things to Cleopatra. And Cleopatra is afraid. And Cleopatra says, well, the battle's over. That means soon Octavius will be here. Time to make some decisions. So she withdraws to the monument. We imagine maybe it's meant to suggest like a pyramid, the monument, off the ground, elevated by 5 or 6 feet. A recess there where they can see anybody coming. And in her mind, she will she thinks she will kill herself rather than yield to Octavius, because let's get this out. The Roman style is capture the big ones, bring them back to Rome, put them in a cage, and drag them through Rome for the Roman mob entertainment, and they will throw rotten tomatoes and say insulting things at them. A very humiliating experience. Nobody wants that. And there's a great scene at the end in Act 5 of Julius Caesar, in which Brutus and Cassius discuss this. Wonderful, wonderful scene. It's their farewell scene in Julius Caesar, which maybe we'll do sometime, because it is the first great tragedy, just before Hamlet. Okay, back to us. So Cleopatra withdraws, and she sends a messenger to Antony, telling Antony that she is dead, that she has committed suicide. Okay? Now watch this, because we're going to be analyzing the sexual metaphor as well. So basically, this is, I'm sorry for you very young, but you can handle this. You've seen enough. This is the woman's faking, pretending orgasm. She pretends to die. Wow. Antony then decides, my God, my people around me are killing themselves before I can. I'm ashamed of myself. Eros, hold the sword, and I will run on it. Eros says, I don't want to do that. He adores, he worships Antony. Do it, please, I beg you. Do it. I've got to do this thing. Do it. So, whoa, here we go. Eros says, turn your head for a minute, then do it. Okay, so Antony turns his head. Eros kills himself. Eros kills himself rather than obey Antony and kill Antony. Now we're at the very end of Act 4 here, and this is very important. This is great. So then Antony is more humiliated. He's feeling like a fool, really, and he becomes a fool. And in my opinion, this is the foolishness of the male sexual act. That's what Shakespeare is mocking. The silly, spasmodic behavior of the male at such a time. He's mocking it. He's making fun of it. Because Antony botches, he makes a mess of his own attempt to die. Okay, he takes the sword and stabs himself. But he's not dead. And he still has a lot in him. So then a new messenger comes in and says, Cleopatra sent me. She feared that you might do this. She's not dead. Servants, bring me to Cleopatra. And so we get the absurd spectacle of servants carrying this man. Let's even leave the sword in him just to make it even more ridiculous. This dying man carrying him to the monument. And then even more absurd, they have to lift him up those 5 or 6 feet to put him in the monument. There he dies after some very moving. Imagine. Farewell, I'm dying, Egypt, dying, he says. He also says, trust no one but Proculeius. Of the people around Octavius, trust no one. And basically, Antony wants Cleopatra to somehow live. He doesn't want her to die. Oh boy. So, at the very end of Act 4, get this, Antony dies. Sexual metaphor, Antony dies. But there's still Act 5 to go. And Cleopatra, it's Cleopatra's. She owns it. It's hers. It's her glory. Act 5. Okay, here we go. I'm not sure I can do this though. Basically, Act 5 is kind of mystical. It's mystical. It has a lot of wit in it. By the way, Proculeius comes, but Proculeius was not the one to trust. Proculeius basically betrays Cleopatra. Then Octavius, though, sends Dolabella. Now, I'm sure that if anyone had asked Antony, do you trust Dolabella? Does anyone trust Dolabella? Antony would have said, absolutely not. The man is an icicle. The man is an iceberg, incapable of feeling. That's certainly what anybody would have said. Caesar would have said this. So, follow this, please. Dolabella comes to Cleopatra. Cleopatra, at this moment, is kind of under the control. She's in danger of being captured. And Dolabella comes, and his job is to try to capture her. So Dolabella says, Madam, maybe you know me. No, I don't. But Cleopatra is very, very melancholy at this point. She's kind of absent-minded, and she almost doesn't listen to him. And that's interesting, too. You can get an allegory out of all of this. I'm not sure what. I've never tried, but that would be great, because Dolabella is wonderful. Okay. Cleopatra starts talking. And she says, okay, she starts thinking about Antony. And she says, I dreamt there was this great man called Antony. And on and on and on, a long speech, a couple of speeches, maybe a total of 20 lines. And she says absent-mindedly to Dolabella, do you think there was such a man? Dolabella melts. Sorry, god damn. Dolabella basically melts. Dolabella is overwhelmed by what? By Cleopatra's passion, by her heart. And Cleopatra says to Dolabella, what do you think Caesar plans to do with me? And Dolabella says what he is supposed not to say, what he would be the last man in the world to say, Madam, he will lead you in a triumph through the streets of Rome, triumph, a parade. Madam, no matter what he says, he plans to put you in that cage and lead you through the streets of Rome. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that Dolabella, that man, says that. At that time. Basically, he's betraying everything he believes. Or he thought he thought he believed. Whoa. In the presence of Cleopatra, he changes completely. It's a transformation. It's a metamorphosis. Now comes the ascent. The ascent of Cleopatra. It began at the end of Act 4, and gradually she's talking all the time to her women who are around her. She says these wonderful speeches about Antony. Okay. By the way, Antony, in his dying, several times says, I come. I come. Death, I come. Woman, when he's on his way to her, I'm coming. I'm coming. This sexual word appears between the end of Act 4 and Act 5 12 times. Is that a chance? Is that a coincidence? No. Especially at the times when it's said. This is first the male orgasm, and then later the female. And I've got to explain what I mean by mysticism, and that'll calm me down a little bit. Excuse me. Okay. The reason why Act 5 is mystical in this sense. Contemptus mundi. Contemptus mundi. The contempt for this world. The contemptus mundi is perhaps an almost inevitable phase of mysticism. That is, one realizes that this world is really very little, not very important. Everything, ourselves included, perishable, let's say, and maybe something better awaits us and maybe not, but in the end there's not much here and there's absolutely nothing to hold on to. This is a stage of the mystical progression, and it's at this stage that Cleopatra reaches, and this becomes her glory. Contemptus mundi. Now, here we go. It's so powerful. Okay. Cleopatra has decided she's going to kill herself. And the only thing she really cares about is, let's say, being worthy of Antony. I gotta get this out. She just wants to join Antony in paradise. It's not Christian, though. It's not Christian. Of course, they're not Christian. So in the Elysian fields, in the classical underworld, whatever, wants to join him. I gotta stop here. I gotta stop. This is too much. I told the story in the classroom. I would. I mean, it's too powerful. Okay, I gotta practice here. She only cares about becoming his wife, because she, of course, has never been his wife. She has been, strictly speaking, his mistress, his concubine, his kept woman. She's going to join him. So, the plan, she has studied methods of killing herself for many years. And many of the Grates did this, and it was a wise thing to do, because life could end pretty quickly. Excuse me. Cleopatra has studied death, dying. Not like the philosophers, but now she becomes kind of a philosopher. So, she has ordered a servant, a poor farmer along the Nile, comes to her with a basket of figs. The Romans who are around her now, I mean, she's basically captive, but she's a little bit free in her recess there. The Romans let this man by with this. What do you have there? I have some figs, Nile figs, for the queen. They look in there, no problem. Well, in the bottom of this basket of figs is an asp. Okay. Asp, a poisonous snake. This guy is a clown, and I bring you joy of the worm. Now, worm is a phallic symbol, male organ phallic symbol, and so the language is still sexual. Anyway, Cleopatra's greatest speech, in a play full of great speeches, is her dying speech. But as she's preparing the asp, her best friend Charmian dies literally of a broken heart. Okay, I know we don't have much time. So then she applies the asp lovingly. It's kind of like a sexual, mystical thing, and she dies. She dies gently. Another of her servants kills herself too. And as she dies, of course she says, I come, Antony. Okay, I'm going to try to read a little of the greatest speech. No, I can't do it. Give me my robe. I can't do it. I come. I come. I come. Husband, I come. Or her dying words. Dying. Get it? Okay. Caesar comes in and feels cheated, but he's a great man too. And as I've told you already, although he doesn't have much heart, he admires those who do. Though, of course, he will triumph in the material sense in the world over them. And he delivers a kind speech which ends the play in praise of Cleopatra. I guess that's all I can. There it is. Wonderful. Great play.